On today's episode, we're joined by co-founder of Based Politics, Brad Polumbo, to hear the wisdom of a 6-year-old on Will Smith and Ukrainian President Zelensky, look into why the capitalist class is unnecessary and parasitic to society, find out that we need to defend Ukraine because we're already in World War III, hear someone posit that Republicans only lose because they don't grow government enough, and finally, learn how everything would be cheaper and better if we transformed our economy to electric vehicles overnight. This is Cringe Posts. Hello, friends. Welcome to this episode of the Cringe Posts podcast. This is the show where we take a look through our social media feeds. We find the cringiest political and cultural takes. We break down where they went wrong, what's the underlying assumptions that they've gotten wrong, and we try to laugh and have fun along the way. This week, we are joined by Based Politics and Freedom of Economic Education's own Brad Polumbo. So thank you so much for joining Britt and I today. And so before we get into critiquing other people's posts, we, of course, always like to make fun of our own. We also want to shout out our website. We've got cringepost.com if you want to view any of these posts. If you're listening to this on the audio version, not on the video version, you can see them there. And we're going to go ahead and make fun of Brad's post. But before we do that, Brad, if you want to shout out what you're working on, anything you're doing, thanks again for being with us today.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Yeah, Brad Polumbo. I'm a libertarian conservative, economics-focused journalist and the co-founder of Based Politics, base-politics.com, or search Based Politics on podcasts.
Awesome. So, since we don't like to throw stones from glass houses, as we are fond of saying, we always put some of our old bad posts up here, and this is just a great one from Instagram here, and it's kind of a series of interactions, starting, it looks like on Twitter initially, and then kind of got posted onto Instagram. So, for anyone not familiar with Jacob Wohl, is that the correct pronunciation? Do you want to give a little bit of background on who he turns out to be here?
So, Jacob Wohl, and you guys had a tough time with this because I actually have my Twitter set up so it auto-deletes all my tweets after a year. So that's brilliant. I had so many trash tweets you could have gone through, but I sent you this one because somebody preserved it in memoriam because Jacob Wohl posted it on his Instagram story. Essentially, Jacob Wohl is think InfoWars, but millennial. He's like a far-right hoaxster, conspiracy guy, very outlandish, crazy, to be honest, a big Trump simp. But he essentially is kind of a joke in political circles because he's always having press conferences for his latest conspiracy or whatever. And I got absolutely ratioed into oblivion and dragged on Twitter by everyone because I said that as crazy as he may be, he's a nut job, but he's still low-key a snack. And that becomes because he has posted shirtless pictures and this man is ripped. You just gotta hand it to him.
I love the interaction here with Yashar Ali posting Brad, just something wrong with you, man. And then of course this whole interaction here gets posted by Jacob Wohl with the quote snack. What does this mean?
He does knows he genuinely what it not means.
Know? Okay, yeah. I mean, is that a tweet that you ended up deleting earlier than your 1 year, or did that stay? Did that one stay?
No, I've left it up. I've doubled down on that take. The thing is, his face is a 5, but his body's a 10.
Okay.
It's just the truth. I mean,
right. Well, here's the thing. Sometimes the worst people can have correct opinions sometimes, and sometimes people with bad opinions, they can be attractive dudes. What can you say? It is what it is.
And you're right too. People with bad takes can be right sometimes. If you think somebody's wrong or just bad, and then you discard everything they have to say, well, nobody's wrong about everything, and nobody's right about everything. The world's not black and white like that.
Well, except for us on Cringe Posts. We're always right about everything. But other than that, exactly. Yeah, that's it. Our past Cringe Posts obviously show that is not the case. But moving on, we'll go ahead and look at our first tweet here. This one comes to a reply about... gosh. It comes to a reply on Twitter from a thread that... I can't even remember what the original topic was, but this person tweets, Here. As my 6-year-old said this morning, in a world full of Will Smiths, be a Zelensky. prayer emoji, Ukrainian flag emoji. This one is incredibly cringe. If you are watching this and either are not aware of Oscars pop culture, or is sometime in the future and it's not totally relevant news, just recently, Chris Rock made a joke about Will Smith's wife at the Oscars, and Will Smith went up on stage and slapped him across the face for it. A big controversy about the slap. Was it justified? Was it not? Was the joke okay? Was it not? All that kind of stuff. And so this person, of course, his 6-year-old, who definitely said this thing, it was a very real thing that definitely happened, not at all made up. His 6-year-old said, "In a world full of Will Smiths, be a Zelensky." Of course, the prime minister or president of Ukraine. I think the president of Ukraine. Good grief. That's just such a... We've gone over these like my kid said posts before, but this one is
always
just
fake.
Oh, always. And this one is just so quintessentially like current pop culture event with current political fad combined into just to a concentrated orb of unbearable cringe.
Yeah, kids don't talk like that. Especially a 6-year-old.
Yeah, I know. If the 6-year-old's talking, it's probably like, "This is my favorite Pokemon. I like powerful ones." That's what a 6-year-old's talking about, not Zelensky.
Yeah, the 6-year-old doesn't know who Zelensky is, but also, like, there's this weird simp culture emerging for Zelensky, and look, I think Russia's invasion of Ukraine is terrible. I think he's been heroic in some ways in the way he's defending his country, and I don't know a ton about international affairs, but I know enough to know that Zelensky and the government of Ukraine is sus. So it's like, they can simultaneously be, the victims of this conflict, right? They're being invaded and being violently attacked by another country. But that doesn't mean you should become a simp for this guy who has done very shady stuff in the past. It's like, you might want to be a little careful before you go worship. This reminds me of the NPC meme where they hold up, BLM, rainbow, Ukraine flag. I support the current thing. And I think people are just too quick to latch on to fads. That's what this kind of tweet tells me.
Yeah, when I saw this one, it made me laugh because it's like, in a world full of people that use violence and kind of shun peace, to solve disagreements, be someone that shuns having a peaceful solution, and calling for no-fly zones to create World War III. Yeah, you're right. Like, I don't know much about Zelensky either. I only know what he's done since Russia invaded in a lot of ways, and the biggest one to me that was kind of awful was when he was calling for the no-fly zone over Ukraine, which is just terrible. It's like that is not a way to actually seek peace, especially for your people, right, who are suffering the most right now.
Well, my favorite talking point is this line that we need to go defend democracy in Ukraine, which, of course, we did the whole shady overthrow in 2014 of Ukraine, but even let's even just say that miraculously since 2014 it's become a legitimate democracy, which there's just so many problems with. About a little more than a week ago, Zelensky banned 11 political parties, including opposition parties to his own, because they're pro-Russia. And it's like, there's so many takeaways from this. Like, primarily, one, that's not democratic, right? That's just banning opposition political parties, even if they're abhorrent, is not democratic. So if you're defending this ideal of democracy, then, well, you might need to rethink supporting Zelensky. Two, if there's enough support for Russia in a country that is actively being invaded by Russia, like, let's say, there's a huge contingent of Ukrainians that support Russia, well, then maybe there's something that you need to consider about some sort of level of assimilation or some level of peace brokerage if there's that much positive support for a nation that's actively invading you, because that's obviously a terrible thing for Russia to do. And if there's still that level of support, you might need to think maybe there's some peaceable solution to this.
I don't know what you're talking about. The U.S. has a great track record of promoting democracy abroad. Every time we do that, we install very democratic dictators. Things go very well. The regime change always ends out great for the local people, and anything else means that you're a Putin propagandist.
Right. Well, just look at Iran. That's a perfect example.
It's so obvious even a 6-year-old knows it. So
yeah, right. Oh man, I was gonna say, if I'm teaching my 6-year-old to quote anyone or to say things like this, I hope it's like Ron Paul or something. That's it. I'll be that guy. But yeah, no, that isn't how 6-year-olds talk. It's also, although maybe it is. Maybe because the foreign policy of the U.S. really is run by 6-year-olds. That would explain a lot. That would explain a lot to me, because that seems to be the sort of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results that often accompanies 6-year-olds. Okay, we're going to move on to our next post. And this one is from a historic tweet, historic quotes account from Eugene Debs, who was a historic socialist, and so I thought this was a good quote of his to critique. And I'm pretty sure this is from one of his books, but it's not attributed in the tweet, and I didn't bother looking up where specifically, if this was from a speech or like a book or something like that. But anyway, Eugene Debs' quote comes, and it reads, "The capitalist class is unnecessary to society. Its members do absolutely nothing that is useful. Their function is to spend what the working class produces. Let me use Andrew Carnegie as an illustration. He is a fully developed capitalist and therefore a fully developed parasite." And this is just really funny because even if you don't like Carnegie, even if you think his whole industry is terrible and shady, the Carnegie Foundation has donated more to charity than any of us will probably see in our lifetimes in what we will totally earn. Because the great thing about capitalism is that when you provide excess wealth, there's oftentimes, one, the benefit of the exchange that happens, the goods that are being produced, and the service that provides to society to have access to those goods. But secondarily, when people get very wealthy, oftentimes great deals of philanthropy comes from that. And more often than not, you see that even if you don't support, the motives of someone acquiring a lot of wealth, even if you think someone is very selfish for getting a lot of wealth.
No, I think Bernie Sanders can spend all that money much better than the Carnegie Foundation ever did.
Right. Or the UN, right? Just like Elon Musk challenged them to, right? We'll solve poverty. Just give me the plan.
This is actually, it's rooted in a very Marxist-esque concept, right? Which is the idea that capitalists, the owners of businesses or factories or whatever, extract the value of the labor of the workers, when in reality they enable it, right? I mean, somebody has to make massive investments, take on risk, manage and coordinate organizations and businesses and enterprises. There's a lot more that goes into goods and services more than just labor. And ironically, what's really interesting is you look at somebody like Jeff Bezos, who, look, I'm happy to criticize him on a number of things. In some ways, Amazon has been crony capitalist, but in a bigger picture, they've actually been a great example of how in capitalism, even imperfect, not totally free market capitalism, capitalists do society a lot of good in the pursuit of wealth. I mean, he got rich, yes, but he did it by creating literally hundreds of thousands of jobs, directly and indirectly, and delivering goods to people's doorsteps more affordable and faster than ever before. And there's even a study by a Nobel Prize-winning economist, William Norhaus, that found only 2% of the actual value created by an innovation ends up in the pockets of that innovator. Right? So he might make several $1 billion off of it, but hundreds of billions in value are created throughout society, dispersed to everyone. And so I actually think this tweet is a good example of the opposite of the truth.
Yeah. It's funny because this person says, I'm going to use Andrew Carnegie as an illustration, and then he doesn't use any example, like specifics about, because there's some things, right? It's like, well, he lobbied and kind of had an unfair playing ground by using the government to do certain things and have certain tariffs. But Brad, I really liked your point that you made, because like most of the wealth that, like big wealth that is made, Microsoft, Amazon, any of these different types of companies, including, the steel companies that Andrew Carnegie had, were made by making goods cheaper, right? Cheaper and more accessible to the working class people, because that's the only way that the world gets better, right? Is when you can more efficiently allocate and create goods and services for people, so that people can actually get them with less effort, right?
Apple didn't get rich by making more expensive versions of iPhones to sell to the 1%, right? They got rich by making the iPhone cheaper and more mass producing it so everyone could afford one. And that's what people don't seem to understand.
And then when they wanted to get, when Android, well, not that Android's one company, it's open source software, but other phone manufacturers wanted to undercut the iPhone because the iPhone was seen as a luxury product, even though relative to what it provided, it was way cheaper and more accessible. But then they came in and undercut, and so you have all these different phone companies. It's like, well, Samsung's now providing, luxury phones. Okay, then the company OnePlus came in and started creating premium experiences.
I don't know. Sounds pretty parasitic to me. Bunch of parasites.
So, but yeah, all that to illustrate the point. But like you were saying, Brett.
Yeah, and it's like I love the Microsoft example. Like, Bill Gates, obviously commits to giving away whatever, all of his wealth by the time he dies or whatever. But like the amount of value that Microsoft itself has generated not only just through all the people that it hires and works for it, but also from the products and services, Excel and Word and all these different suites of products that enable other businesses to exist and also hire people. Like, that is almost incalculable, right? How much value that has brought to the world and how much better off everyone is because of that. And I'll look up that study you mentioned, Brad, about the 2% of wealth, because I'm sure even if you just went another layer outward, right, to look at these other externalities, like, it's even a smaller fraction of that, right? Like, I'm sure it's like trillions and trillions of dollars worth of value and goods and things that Bill Gates has brought to the world.
Another good example is Google. I mean, Google, I think Google has personally screwed me over, right? It's a problematic company in a lot of ways. They labeled one of my articles about inflation hateful and derogatory content. But just their actual business model is to provide people with free email, free mass video entertainment and information through YouTube, and a worldwide search network that puts literally unprecedented information at your fingertips, all for free. And that's their business model. Yet they're like a parasite, I guess, by this logic.
Well, and the funny thing is, it's like people love to take advantage of those services, and then usually, and not to say that there isn't problems with this, but generally conservatives will complain about the cost of that, like the data privacy or the trends that they use, and it's like, yes, like I do agree that the heavy censorship or rerouting of information that they do can be a problem, but you also have to recognize that when you're using these services for free, there is a cost. The cost is like your data, and that's the agreement you go into. And for all intents and purposes, that data can be misused, but it also can be used to make your life way better. Like when I go to a grocery store and they're like, put in your phone number and we'll give you coupons, I'm agreeing to give them my data for that, right? But they're giving me the benefit of sending me coupons, and they know what I like to buy, and so they're like, here's a relevant coupon. So it's
you want to hear something crazy?
There's always Netflix, a back and forth there. Yeah, go ahead.
Netflix does this thing where they show you, and my boyfriend and I realized this recently, they show you different promotional images for the covers of the shows when you're browsing based on what they know about you. So for a good example is there's a Netflix show called Sex Education, where the protagonist is heterosexual, but one of the other main characters is gay. And so for me and my boyfriend, when we're scrolling through Netflix, the promotional image that comes up is an image of the same-sex couple. But if you're scrolling, it will be the heterosexual couple. I literally went on my computer on incognito and looked. And on one sense, that's invasive. But on the other sense, it helps us find shows we're more interested in. Like,
yeah, right. Well,
they do it because it works.
And that's the whole balance of it, right? Like, you would hope that there's transparency in what data they're collecting, but to be honest, most people just agree. They don't even read the deals, which is, to be fair, you could argue back and forth on that. But the point is that, like, these services generally can be used to make life better. Like when, people are like, Google's tracking your location. Yeah, I don't love that, but I also really like the ability of Google Maps to know where I'm going.
Yeah. You also consent to it,
where was I?
Right? You literally say, yes, you may track my location.
Exactly. Well, and it's so funny to think like, yeah, I'm going to use the map apps, but I'm totally oblivious to the fact they're tracking my location. Like, like who thinks that? Who's like, well, yeah, I can use a GPS, but they know where I am? Like, well, yes, that's the point. So it's all these exchanges of information, but there's value being produced from it. It's not this parasitic, to sort of weave it back to the post here, It's not this parasitic taking only. They're providing you a resource and a benefit in return for that.
And the only like parasitic aspect of these companies, whether it's Google or any of them, is the aspect that is rooted in having some form of government control over it, right? So that's like, I don't care if Google knows where I'm going if they're using that information to make my life better, right? To recommend stops along the way, or they know that I really like stopping at whatever restaurant or whatever when I'm traveling to Montana. Like, that's great, but like where it becomes bad is like, oh crap, like are they going to use this to like, is the government going to come in and say, hey, you've got to give us this data, right? Those are the aspects when it becomes like, I don't actually like it, right? That these companies have control.
There's the crony capitalist element, which is like Amazon, for example, lobbies in favor of a $15 minimum wage because they know that they can afford it, but their small mom and pop businesses they're competing with will go broke and go out of business. That kind of stuff genuinely is parasitic, but it's also not capitalist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And the last thing I will say is, the last point he says is the idea, or not the last point. One of the points in this post is he says the capitalist class, their function is to spend what the working class produces. And let's just for a second assume that that's the case, that there's no production at all being made, and the only thing they do is spend the production of the working class. That in and of itself can actually be a beneficial cause, in the same way that it's like, if someone works to provide, like a bunch of food, and you're on an island and there's scarce resources, if you eat all of that food right away on your first day and you have none for the remainder of the trip, you'll starve and die. And so the use of resources in and of itself is a skill set and can have utility. Now, I'm not saying that that's all the capitalist class produces. I think that that's a false accusation. But even still, when a lot of times people will talk about like speculator class, like financial industries where all they do is speculate on stocks, or I think that in and of itself can provide value for people. It's not just a parasitic thing, because it lets those people's jobs is to be able to say, this company is worth investing in because they are going to produce something valuable. You should give them money and they will do good things with it. You'll be rewarded, and society at large will be. So the idea of like they only spend what the working class produces, even if that's true, that can still be a benefit, and a net benefit, not only for the capitalist class but for the working class. Those people's lives get better when things and services become more affordable and life becomes easier because of automation in certain areas and things like that. Okay, unless you have anything else on this, we'll move to our next post. And this one starts, and surprisingly, Representative Omar's tweet is not the cringe post. It's a reply to her tweet. So, Representative Ilhan Omar tweets, "As we support Ukraine in their fight against Russia's brutal invasion, we must avoid the knee-jerk calls that risk nuclear war. A no-fly zone is not simply declared. It must be militarily enforced. It would mean the beginning of World War III. We must reject this completely." I think that's a good take. Good for her.
Rare, but correct.
Yes, exactly. Like we were talking at the beginning. The worst person just made a great point. And then we have a reply that starts, 1. World War III has already started. If the West had done something about Crimea in 2014, perhaps we wouldn't be where we are now. While Putin's possible use of nuclear weapons gives pause, as it should, leaving Ukraine to its own defenses is also unacceptable. And
that's quite the caveat there.
The end of the world should give you pause.
Yeah. Nuclear war. Yeah. Obviously, you should think about World War III and nuclear war and all that, but do it anyway. I love the World War III's already started. If you just declare that, then you're like, well, don't be scared of World War III. We're already in it. So the logical step is to defend Ukraine.
I can't understand this, because I understand that like what's happening in Ukraine is really some heartbreaking stuff. You're having thousands of people killed. You're having millions of people displaced. But when you talk about a hot war between the U.S. and Russia, let alone a nuclear war, you're talking not just about billions of people dying. You're actually talking about the fate of humanity, right? Because I have a weirdly specific interest in post-apocalyptic fiction. So I've read a lot of books about nuclear war. 1 Second After, Alas, Babylon, from the classics to the moderns. And if enough nuclear weapons were detonated, you would have potentially the U.S. enter an ice age. And almost all human life could die, let alone talking about radiation, let alone just talking about the billions of people in cities that would be evaporated, right? Like, and yet you're saying, oh, well, we're already basically in World War III, and it's basically the same as letting Ukrainian civilians die in a war. It's not. And it actually, I think, it really diminishes the horror of nuclear war, which we've never really seen beyond a few specific bombings to end World War II. But even those are like a fraction of the technology we have today. The bombs the U.S. dropped on Japan are like 1/50th, 1/100th, 1/500th of the weapons we have today, whatever it may be. And so I almost worry that people like this just don't take it seriously. They don't know what it entails. And if enough people think like that, that's the only way it could ever actually happen.
The real question, the real first question I have for you, Brad, is if you've read all that post-apocalyptic literature, how accurate are the Fallout games? That's my question.
So I've only played Fallout New Vegas, is the only one.
Okay. Well, that's the best one, so you're okay.
they're not that very accurate, but they're cool.
Dang it. See if life just became Fallout New Vegas after World War III, maybe we should get involved. That's all I'm saying. Sorry to cut you off there, Britt. Go ahead.
No, you're okay. I was actually curious about that too because I love the Fallout games. Use it as sim for the upcoming World War III. But the thing that gets me about this is it's this kind of classic neocon thing. Well, if we just done something in 2014, when we actually, the reason Crimea happened in 2014 was because we, had a coup to overthrow the democratically elected government in Ukraine and install a pro-U.S. regime in place. So that's kind of like always it's kind of the old joke of history started in 2022 or 2001. And so everything that happens from here, it's like, well, if we just done something in the past, maybe we would have avoided. But it's like, no, actually, why we are here today is because of all the intervention and things that we did back then. And doing more of the wrong thing is not how you get back on track.
Well, and these kinds of takes always crop their heads because it's only ever highlighted when it benefits whatever the narrative that corporate media and the government are trying to sell. Because think about the fact that like right now, we're not hearing anything about the plight of Afghanistan's women, which was a huge deal when we withdrew from Afghanistan, right? Now, either the reality is that one, it wasn't as big a deal as they said it is, or two, it's just not a sexy topic anymore. So let's move on to the next thing and leave them, out to dry. So all of this, like you were saying earlier, with our take about the 6-year-old, all of this trendy sort of politics makes it so that people just want to latch on to the latest thing, and then they completely ignore whatever isn't politically expedient. I mean, not to beat a dead horse talking about Yemen, but like all of these people worried about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is bad. It's like, just wait till you hear what the U.S. is doing in Yemen, where we've been bombing out hundreds of thousands of people and starving millions more by our actions. But it's okay because we're not physically walking over in their space, right? It's only okay because we're not claiming the land. We can make life hell for them. We can utterly destroy that country. But as long as we're not, walking into there, marching with tanks, it's okay suddenly. Kind of, or maybe it's just out of sight, out of mind. I don't know. But like you're saying with this, if only we'd done something in 2014, that was kind of the thing with Afghanistan is people like, well, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have invaded, but now that we're there, we have to stay in. And it's kind of that reverse idea there where it's like, well, yeah, maybe we should have done something back in 2014, but now we're in this situation. So now we're in World War III already. And it's always this justification. There's never a pause of reflection to think, what are the unintended consequences here? Even as they say, nuclear weapons should give us pause. They don't actually pause. They just kind of give lip service to that. It's the Shrek Farquaad, like, you may lose some of your lives, but that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we'll move on to our next post here. And this one is a reply to our very own Brad Polumbo here. So, Brad tweeted, 2 things can be true at once. 1, after their clown show smear jobs of Kavanaugh, Democrats who complain about the treatment of their SCOTUS nominees are hypocrites. 2, GOP criticisms of KBJ should stick to the substance and her judicial philosophy, not cheap smears. I think that's fair. I think that's, like, we talked about this last week. There is a little bit of, like, wanting to see them butt heads and, like, absolutely play scorched earth. But on the other hand, like, from a principled standpoint, you should be judging a judge based on their merits, right? Like, you shouldn't try to play stupid little games. And then this person replied to Brad's tweet saying, I appreciate the sentiment here, but the right playing fair while the left uses every dirty trick in the book is equivalent to having one hand tied behind its back, which is why Republicans have been losing. They changed the game, so play on the same field by the same rules. And to this I say, this is the quickest road to the bottom you could possibly imagine. And if this kind of thing goes on, court packing will be a reality, and it will be 1 new justice, and then it will be 2 new justices, and then who knows? The parties change. It'll be 5 new justices, and you've completely destroyed the institution. Which I guess if you're more anarchist, then hey, that's not a terrible thing. But like, it's just like if you're trying to actually have any sort of like meaning in a limited scope of judgment, or someone using judgment as a justice. This is not the way to do that. Yeah. I don't think.
I just feel like I hear this sentiment all the time. Oh, the right needs to fight back, or seize the government and use it to fight the culture war, all these arguments. And it's like, I just don't know how to explain kindergarten level morality to people. It's like, two wrongs don't make a right. And also, whatever precedents you set will immediately be used against you. Like we have seen this time and time again. Whether it's if Democrats go and abolish the filibuster, they're going to regret it, because when Republicans take power, they'll pass all sorts of stuff they don't like. Democrats got rid of the filibuster for judicial nominees, but kept it for Supreme Court. Mitch McConnell came in and got rid of it for the Supreme Court. It's like these kinds of tit-for-tat escalations are essentially just a race to the bottom. And also just fundamentally, like, for me, when I'm deciding what the right thing to do is, I don't believe morality is relative to what the people around me are doing. That is, if anything, a very like Marxist way to view the world. So I think, what is the right and fair thing for me to do? Because I'm not ultimately doing it for the other people. I'm doing it for myself, to feel good about who I am. And so the fact that other people engage in bad acts and smears doesn't shift my calculus that that's something I should start doing. Because at the end of the day, I have to look at the mirror at myself, not them. And I don't want to stoop to that level.
Yeah, that's the one of the common threads we see, you know, being knee deep in cringe posts every week, is that a significant factor in that is that a person doesn't actually have a principle. They just have the philosophy of, I just want power, and whatever morals or whatever actions I need to take to get that power or enforce my will on another person is what I'm going to do. That's what might makes right in that way, and you definitely see that in this post. The line that got me laughing about it is this expert's opinion on why Republicans have been losing is because they haven't been fighting fair. And it's like, no, the reason Republicans lose is because conservatives have conserved nothing, over the past however many years. When you've got two people in the town square trying to sell you on doing a job, and one of them actually has some sort of plan, even if it's crazy, and then the other person's like, I don't know, I'll just wait and see. You're going to go with the person that seems like they have a plan, right? And the Republicans suck because, one, they don't have any principles, and then two, because they don't have any principles, they don't actually have a plan or anything they can stand on or anything they can actually hammer on to say, hey, this is the direction you should go as a country. And obviously I don't think any of us are Republicans here, we're all libertarian, but it's just like there's just no leadership, right? They've abdicated that aspect of it, and a significant aspect of leadership is having a clear vision of who you are, right? And that principle of what you stand on. The left has a pretty clear one. It's whatever power we can get to enact our philosophies of equity and equality and Marxism upon the world is what we're going to do. So whatever we have to, whatever bodies we have to walk over, whatever justices we have to smear to do that, we're going to do that. And the Republicans have not painted a picture opposite of that. And I think there's a lot of people that would actually, really resonate with someone that is principled, right? And you kind of see little signs of that with Trump, in that it's like Trump's philosophy is like, well, I'm just going to punch you back, right? And so people, that small amount of like, not principle, but just like a vision was enough to get everyone riled up about him, right? So imagine if you had someone that came in that was a little bit charismatic and could actually articulate a clear, like, hey, this is the principle we stand on. Even if I lose because of this principle, I'm going to still adhere to it. You would see some pretty cool things, and I don't think you'd see a lot of Republicans losing.
It's frustrating because they, the argument always is this, like, that kind of person can't win because the system is big, therefore we have to use the system to win. And that then you're just in that Lord of the Rings, like, use the, just wear the ring of power, you just use it, and you end up getting corrupted. I can't think of a single time when the government has grown and in an effort to try to cut something or to shrink something, and that hasn't either immediately been rolled back or specifically been used to then grow again. You think about all of the cheers during the Trump years of executive orders cutting regulations and things like that. And you think, okay, well, first of all, how much more have executive orders been used to grow government by one? But okay, so we're using this power, great. Now he's out of office. He did nothing to curb the power of the executive order, and so executive orders can go to enforce things like vaccine mandates and mask mandates and lockdowns and regulatory things during COVID, because he used executive orders to quote or to cut regulation. Cutting regulation was great, But when you use an evil power and you don't cut off that evil power at the hilt, it's going to get used right against you right away again. So I don't know. It's frustrating. I don't know that we've even had anyone who ideologically really is committed to the right kinds of principles in office. And I tend to think even if you get that person in there, if they're using sort of the means of power to try to achieve good principle, it's either going to be ineffective or ultimately just counterproductive in the worst kinds of ways. Okay, and we'll move on to our last cringe post, and this one comes from the president himself, President Biden, who tweets, "Loosening environmental regulations won't lower prices, but transforming our economy to run on electric vehicles powered by clean energy will mean that no one will have to worry about gas prices. It will mean tyrants like Putin won't be able to use fossil fuels as a weapon." You heard it, guys. Loosening environmental regulations won't lower prices, and if we just turn everything into electric, then it will be cheap, and we're not at the whims of Putin. Game's out. Game's over.
Just buy an electric car starting at $70,000, right?
Yeah. Well, if you can get one while supplies last because of the chip shortage and the supply chain issues, right?
Right. It's also just like economically untrue to say that loosening environmental regulations won't lower prices. I mean, regulations impose costs. When costs are imposed on businesses, that is a negative supply shift, higher prices. This is pretty basic stuff. He can borrow this book behind me, Basic Economics, Thomas Sowell, if he needs to understand. You could say, you could make an argument that the environmental regulations are worth the trade-off, but trade-offs exist, and you can't just pretend that they don't. It's very utopian, pie-in-the-sky thinking. We can have everything if we just get woke and green enough, and that's just not the way that reality works. Reality's about trade-offs.
That's put exactly right. That's the thing that I always get so annoyed with. It's like you can say that the regulations would have a detrimental effect, or that there would be some bad result from it, but you cannot argue that they wouldn't at least initially lower costs, because that's literally what a regulation essentially creates, some kind of barrier that at the very minimum, like if the regulation literally did nothing except for saying you have to read this regulation, technically speaking, someone has to read that regulation, which uses time, and time is a commodity, which means that there's technically a cost raised by reading a regulation, even if the regulation imposed nothing other than you have to read this regulation.
Well, and then if getting rid of the regulation really wouldn't lower prices, that's because the regulation isn't doing anything.
Right.
Yeah. This I was telling Donnie about this earlier last week. My wife and I had a trip to Portugal just 2 weeks ago, and over there they have this environmental regulation where you have to have this diesel exhaust fluid in your car, and it does nothing for the function of the actual engine. It doesn't help the car run any better. All it does is spray some fluid into the exhaust as it comes out, and it neutralizes the carbon. And so we had one of these cars. We drove out to this remote rural area about 4 hours away from any other city in Portugal, and the rental car company forgot to fill up on this diesel exhaust fluid in the car. And so I saw this little alert on it, and it said, "Hey, you'll run out of this fluid here soon, and you won't be able to restart your car if you do." And I was like, "There's no way that is true, right? Like, this doesn't have any action on functioning. It's not like you're running without oil in the car." So, anyways, come to find out, run out of the fluid, car 4 hours away dies, and you can't turn it on, even though it's got full gas, got full charge, and everything. And so the rental car company had to hire a diesel tow truck that is grandfathered in, doesn't have diesel exhaust fluid, to drive 4 hours out to pull our car all the way back to the city, and then send a taxi that's grandfathered in that doesn't have diesel exhaust fluid to grab us. And so because our car couldn't start,
that sounds like it really helped the environment.
It really helped it. It really helped it a lot. And it wasted a whole day of our vacation. It wasted a bunch of time on this tow truck driver and these taxi drivers. Probably about 3 man hours worth of days. And so it's just like, that is an environmental regulation. Does that sound cheaper, than not having that in place? It doesn't sound like it.
Well, and you could take all that wasted cost and you could purchase things like carbon offsets, and you could actually reduce environmental impact voluntarily, and you wouldn't have had any of that, unnecessary cost accrued, plus the environmental pollution of having a tow truck drive out there. But what's crazy about the claim that if you just switch to an electric vehicle economy, you make things cheaper. That's not even necessarily true. The problem with so much environmentalism, and I think I mentioned this on a previous episode recently, that my coworker Todd Myers always points out, is that environmentalists care more about looking like they are environmentally friendly than actually being environmentally friendly. And a great example is in Washington State. Todd wrote on this, so I'm getting data from him. So go check out his article. It's an op-ed talking about state analysis showing switching to electric vehicles is expensive even with high gas prices. And so our Department of Enterprise Services has rolled out this plan that by like 2035 all of our state vehicles have to be electric. And they rolled out that they're going to use Teslas, because even though there are cheaper options like the Chevy Bolt or the Nissan Leaf, they have problems such as the short range of the Leaf or the battery impacts that something like the Bolt has. So there's environmental and like utility problems with these other more affordable options. So they go with Teslas. But the problem is all of the measurements about what would actually make a cheaper economy based on high gas prices and switching to electric vehicles are going off of the cheaper electric vehicle costs of the Bolt and the Leaf. So when it comes to what they're trying to sell you, like it's going to be a cheaper, reality because we're basing it on these projections. But when it comes to what they're actually doing, they're spending way more money and incurring way more cost in the name of looking environmentally.
I find that very hard to believe that government regulators would ever mislead the public or mess something up.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, and the other silly thing about this, of course, is the idea that like the only ways in which gas is used is cars and electric vehicles. It's like, how do you think most homes are heated? Like when we have like,
or most electric cars are powered. Where does the electricity come from?
Yes, exactly.
Fossil fuels.
Right. So it's like, we should, diversify our economy as much as we can. Let's let the free market handle that, and let's get other alternatives running in a way that makes sense. Let people put up nuclear. Let companies that want to do electric energy costs and electric energy production, let them go out on their own and make it. Don't subsidize it by the government, because then you end up wasting money and energy that way. If you go into California, a lot of the times, people will have solar panels on their roof that are facing north and south because that's where their neighbors' houses are facing. The sun will not hit these solar panels very efficiently because it's not on the east to west axis where the sun will actually hit them. They're facing their neighbors. That's what's most important to these people. It's what's important for Biden here, virtue signaling. It's not actually good for the environment. It's not actually good for costs. And the last thing I'll say on this, and if anyone wants to jump in, is just when we're talking about costs and the environment and things, a lot of people can say it doesn't matter what the cost is if we don't have a world to live in. And the problem is that the world we live in is determined by costs. Everything is an exchange, like you were talking about. Like Basic Economics does a great job. Wealth, Poverty, and Politics by Thomas Sowell also really great at highlighting this, that everything that you do is an opportunity cost. There are trade-offs to everything. And so you could say, we can go 100%, emission-free tomorrow, and then you'll end up with massive amounts of starvation, massive amounts of people impoverished overnight, and you'll have like the 1% that's able to survive these costs, and they'll live their glamorous luxury lifestyle, and everyone else gets screwed because food production's down, because energy production's out, because vehicle production's out, all these kinds of things. So costs and the environment are directly related, and the more efficient you can have your economy, the better you can take care of your environment. Okay, well, unless there's anything else, I think we'll call that an episode. So thank you so much, Brad, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Once again, if you want to pitch what you're doing, your socials and your projects, we'd love to follow you there.
Yeah, guys, just search Brad Polumbo, Polumbo, on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, wherever, even on TikTok, or Based Politics on your podcast platform. Subscribe if you enjoyed hearing me ramble. Well, we do it twice a week over there.
Perfect.
Nice.
Awesome. Well, we will catch you on the next one. Take care.